Okay, so we're going to continue with our Google authentication. So we've installed the package. We've added the login, the Google sign-in button to our register and login pages. Make sure my app is running again. So we need to modify 3 more files to make this work. We're going to modify our user model so that if somebody signs in with Google, we want to record that we're not going to have a password. Google isn't going to give us their password, but we want to record in the database that this user is using their Google account, as opposed to somebody who's signed up with the username and password on our own site. And later on, if we enable other providers like Facebook, we want to be able to see who are our Google users, who are our Facebook users, who are the users that have signed up directly with our database. We'll then need to configure the Google sign up with Passport in our app.js. And then we'll need to write the methods so that the user doesn't get a 404 when they click the Google sign up button. So I'm going to close up a bunch of our files that we no longer need. Basically right now, I'll just keep open my globals, my index controller, and my app.js, but I want to go and open up our model. So here's our user model, and our schema is really simple. User has a username and a password. And if we looked in the database, MongoDB also generates a salt value so that each password is hashed with a unique value. So we're going to want to modify this and add a few additional properties here. I'm going to add an OAuth ID property. So this will be when someone signs in with Google, Google will give us their Google ID, so we can attach that user. If it's Facebook, Facebook will attach some kind of unique identifier from their system. We want to create an OAuth provider property. So again, we can record Google, Facebook, GitHub, Microsoft, whatever it is, Twitter, who the provider is. We'll also maybe timestamp the users as well, so we know when those user accounts are created. So I'm just adding these 3 properties to my user model. So we're going to use some of these when somebody registers with the Google account. So I'm just going to open up my database just so we can have a peek at it in my global food database right now in the users collection. So for each user right now, we have a unique identifier, an ID, we have a username, and then we've got salt and hash values for the username. So the salt and hash being used for the password. So when we're using Passport local, this is what we get. So make sure you've added these 3 properties to your user model. And then most of the work we need is going to happen in app.js. We've got to configure that Passport Google OAuth 20 package that we've installed. So in app.js, I'm maybe going to add it here underneath our, so here was our 4-step of Passport authentication. So I'll set up my Google Auth under here. I'm going to create a Google strategy variable, and this is going to use the package we installed. But instead of requiring the whole library, you actually are just creating an instance of the strategy class. So this syntax is a little different from when we've required other NPM packages. We're telling Passport to use our Google strategy, which we're about to configure. And this is where we're going to read our Google configuration values. We're going to set up our client ID, our client secret, and our callback URL. And note, the Google strategy, it's kind of odd, it's unusual in JavaScript, but that the word ID and URL, those are all caps, which is not kind of typical what we would see in JavaScript. We would typically have these in camel case, where the D in ID and the RL and URL would be in lowercase. This is how Google's named these parameters. Again, I've set my callback URL. Right now, this is only going to work locally. If I'm going to push this to Heroku, I'll need to go to my globals file and replace this value with my live URL. For now, I just want to try it out locally. After the curly brace, after we set up the strategy, we're going to add a comma at the end of this closing bracket. So when we configure this, when we call Google, Google is going to send a few things back to us. The first one is an access token. Comes with a secret. We're not too concerned. We're not really going to use those two values, but those are things Google will send back to us. The thing we're most interested in is the profile object. So this will be when Google comes back to us. If Google successfully authenticated the user, it's going to send us back this profile object that's going to have information about the user. And there's one more parameter in the package, in this method we're calling, called done. So this is where our logic goes to evaluate what we got back from Google. So when someone signs in through Google, there's a couple of possibilities. If they're successfully authenticated on Google's end, one possibility is we already have them in our database. So we're just going to log them in. They already exist in our MongoDB. The second possibility is they've never signed into our site with Google before, so we need to create them so that they get added into our user list here. So what we need to do is we're going to use this profile and our user model to determine if this person's signing up for the first time or they've already signed up with us through Google and they're just logging back in. So the first thing we'll do here is check if we got an error. If we got an error, let's at least log it so we can inspect what happened, where the Google sign went off the rails. Sorry, pump that down. First thing we're going to do is actually check if we have this user already. So we're going to check profile ID. So when someone signs up with Google, Google is going to give us a unique identifier that they have. If Nick signs in, Google's got Nick's ID 456 in Google. So when he logs into our site, we can check that ID. We already have a Google user with 456 in our database. So when we try this, we're going to get back either an error or a user. We get no error, and in this case, we're done. The user signed in, we already have them. So this is where we call this done. It's kind of like the express next method. Just carry on and pass that user object forward so that we can check it in the rest of our controller methods and in our navigation bar. Pass the user on to the next method. So we checked our database for this person. We got no error. They've already been here before, so we're saying, yep, they're good. And here's their user account for reference later on in the code. The else comes in, user does not exist, create a new user from this Google profile. We're going to create a new user in this case, and we want to populate the properties. Our username we'll use their display name. So Google, that'll be your Google display name. That's what will show up in the nav bar. Our OAuth ID. Going to come from the ID Google gives us. We'll set our provider to Google. And we'll timestamp the user as created. Print date and time. So we want to create this user if we don't already have them. So we'll create that. Then we just call save. Save is successful. We'll just call done. Pass the user forward. So this is what happens. Somebody authenticates successfully through Google. We look them up in MongoDB with that Google ID and we don't find them. In this case, we'll create a new user and save them. Facebook's process is similar. It's not exactly the same. It's going to be about 90% of the configuration for Facebook will be the same as this. I would have preferred to do this in pieces, but there's really no effective way to do it in pieces. We have to test the whole thing or we can't really run it at all. But I'll leave this code up. I can scroll up or down. Let me know what you need to see. I will move the screen. So most of the work is happening here. Most of the logic happens in our app.js. We still need to modify the index controller. Because if even with this code, if you go ahead and click your sign in with Google button right now, there is no handler for it. So you're going to get a 404 error. So this code never actually gets called or invoked right now. So we're going to write two methods in our index controller, and then we can try it out. It should give us a few minutes if we have to make any adjustments. So in my index controller, I want to add two methods for dealing with Google sign-in. At Google, we want to invoke Google sign-in. So when we have a GET request at our domain /Google, we're going to call passport.authenticate with Google. We've got to specify the scope. So what do we want from Google? We want the user's profile. So this should pop up the Google sign-in when we click our Google button. So that's one method. We also need a method to handle the callback. So this will bring up Google sign-in, but then once the user authenticates through Google, we also need a second root handler. What will the path be? Where is Google going to call? What URL? We set it up in the Google console. We're taking them off to Google. Where is Google going to send them back if they're authenticated? So where else do we, what's the other root handler we need? I'm sure somebody can figure it out. If I run my application right now and click my Google sign-in button, what do you think will happen? Yeah, it'll show up the Google pop-up, and then what will happen after I sign in? Okay. So what will the result be? Let's try it. So I go to log in. I'm already signed in with Google. Whoops. Okay, so I hit sign in with Google. It goes off to here. And why do we get a 404? So Google authenticated me. It sent me back. Why do I have a 404 error? Right, there's no root handler at the root/Google/callback. So that's where Google's sending the user back to, but we need another get handler here. We're going to need another get. Google/callback. We want to call passport.authenticate. Google. We want to set up a failure redirect. If Google sign-in fails, take them to login. Google sign-in works, take them to the food page where they should be signed in and they should see the add, edit, and delete links. So we need this one to invoke Google and this one to handle the Google sign-in. And app.js does all the logic whether to sign them in or register them. When we call passport.authenticate, this basically invokes all of this code here. Check the database for the user, sign them in if we find them, and sign them up if they don't exist. So now we can try this out. So I still have, if I look at my database, I've got 6 users. All of them are signed in with, created with local sign-ins. I'll try again with Google. So Google's going to try to authenticate me. So now it pulls my display name and I'm signed in as an authenticated user. I have access to add, to edit, or to delete now that I'm signed in with my Google account. So what does this look like in MongoDB? If I refresh. So my username just shows as my Google display name. It's got a Google ID. We set the provider as Google and it's time-stamped when I signed up. So now if I log out and log back in, it's not going to create me again. I already have an account. So now I should be able to sign in. And if we refresh, I should still have 7 users here. It's not going to sign me up again because our code in app.js says, well, first go and find the existing user with this Google profile. And if it finds one, we're done. Just hand that user off and keep going. Don't do anything else. If we don't find the user, then we're going to go and create a new one. Now, if I push this code to Heroku right now, my Google sign-in is not going to work on Heroku. How come? Yeah, you're right, Jill. Where would I have to go to change it? Which file would I have to modify? It's one of these 4 files. Right, so in globals, my callback URL right now is pointing to my local host. So if I wanted to run this, be able to run this with Heroku, I'm going to have the live URL. If I upload these changes now with my live callback URL, I should be able to sign in here with Google. So it's building. Just give it a minute to go. Once that build is, the latest version is on Heroku, I should be able to use Google Sign In here. While that's going, I may as well. Okay, so if I try it now, live, I should be able to use Google Sign In. Okay. So now I'm signed in with a different Google account, but it's working live on the server. Okay, we have 5 minutes. So here's what I want you to do. All the code is online on GitHub. I'm going to throw our suggested topics in here. So just give me a minute to do that, and then you'll be able to edit this file. So we've got chat, React, API, JWT. Payments, PayPal. Okay, if you go into the lesson 8 folder, and open up the tutorial list, and then you'll have to click edit in your browser. Don't download the file. I think I can stop the video stream.